Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 200 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome back to the show. In this episode, we're going to continue on our series. We're talking about the number one way to improve your accuracy, and that's with a 6.5 Creedmoor. So we're going to be talking about the 6.5s in this particular podcast. I want to run some numbers on what we were talking about, comfortable and enjoyable shooting, just to give us a baseline. And then an emailer had sent in talking about how the foot-pounds of energy is obsolete. It's about bullet construction and bullet speed. That's what kills. And so I want to dive in a little bit about that as well. So that ought to be a really great podcast. Looking forward to it. So without further ado, here we go. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to TriggerTech. TriggerTech is the maker of fine rifle triggers. They are in all and recommended for all of our custom rifles here. Number one reason is they are the safest trigger on the market, at least in my opinion. They are easy to install, and they are easy to adjust for the end user. So if you want to upgrade your game and you want to do it with a rifle trigger, you can stop over to triggertech.com. That's triggertech.com today. We'd also like to thank Krieger Barrels. Krieger is the maker of fine-cut rifle barrels, family-owned and operated business out of the great state of Wisconsin. Legendary in their ability to make world-class barrels. So if you're in the market for a custom rifle barrel and you want the best, you can stop over to Krieger Barrels and see their fine selection. They also offer a new program called Krieger Direct, where you can order your barrel and have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. So if you want the best and you need it now, stop over to KriegerBarrels.com. That's KriegerBarrels.com today. So the 6.5 Creedmoor, this is where I'm going to start with the 6.5 calibers in general, only because I have spent a lot of time with 6.5s, including the 260 Remington, which I shot in matches for a year, pretty much the predecessor of the 6.5 Creed. I mean, it was the neck-down version of the 308, and one of the reasons why we shot it was because it mirrored the 300 Win Mag and ballistics as far as drop and drift, and had half the recoil. So one of the reasons why it became such a popular match cartridge beyond the 6mm variants, which would be the 243, is that it still kept the recoil down, but at long range had enough impact on target to see hits and misses and so on and so forth. One of the things I think that shocks people when they talk about the 6.5 Creedmoor is its ability to shoot well, but it still has recoil. And we've used them here at the school for school rifles and trainers for several years just because we could buy good quality ammunition from Hornady, and we weighted the rifles up to about 18, 19, 22 pounds, which made them recoil like our training 223s, and we didn't have to make the ammunition. Of course, COVID changed all that in a heartbeat, simply because at that point we had to make our own ammo, and if I'm going to make my own ammo, I'm going to do it in a caliber that I would prefer, which was the 22 Creed. One of the things that struck me about the 6.5 Creedmoor was when we started building them in hunting rifles. So we had a great instructor, and he's healing up. He had some medical issues, some of it related to COVID, and I haven't seen him in a while. His name was Walt Sloyer. Some of you listening may have met Walt here at our shooting school. Great instructor, easygoing guy, good guy to hang out with, a lot of fun. Looking forward to having him back and helping us here at the schools when he gets healed up and healthy. But he had built a lightweight hunting version in 6.5 Creedmoor. And the rifle itself, probably with optics, so it was a traditional Macmillan A3, it was fully adjustable. It was, at that time, a proof barrel, which we don't build on proof anymore. But at that time, it was a proof barrel. And I believe finished like 22 inches, had a suppressor on it, had a bipod, had a Leupold Mark V 3.6 to 18, and good set of rings, sling, all done up. It probably weighed about, I'm going to say closer to 12 pounds. Let's just say 11 to 12 pounds. When he shot the rifle for the first time, his initial reaction was a good reaction that you would get from even younger shooting smaller calibers. But as soon as he shot, he was shocked that, A, how much recoil it had. He was expecting it to have no recoil at all. But also, B, he had bipod hop. So the rifle literally picked up and sat down pointing somewhere else, which is, common for 308s, but in lightweight hunting rifles, really common. And I think he expected that to not be there. And when people look at the 6.5 calibers, I think they look at it that it's such a small caliber that all of this stuff just magically disappears. And in Walt's case, he was actually stunned on how much recoil it had and how much hop it had. Not that it was bad. The recoil was not bad. But in his mind, as with most shooters, when they start talking about these smaller calibers right away, they think that, well, it's not a 300 Win Mag, so it can't have any recoil. And then they're really surprised when they're like, wow, this thing still has a little bit of hop and push to it. It's pretty incredible. And, it's still a 6.5 caliber. It's 140 grain, maybe plus bullet. It's going at a reasonable speed. Think of it like a baby 308, really, when it comes down to it. But rather than shooting a 155 or 165 grain bullet, it's shooting a 140 grain bullet. So you've got that to work with. Now, the 6.5 fills a special category because I would consider that, that step up for most shooters that are getting into bigger game that want a more powerful rifle, per se, as far as, something that has a bigger diameter bullet, something that maybe would be more universally, accepted as far as big game. Think of like elk hunting. And I know for a fact we have lots of customers that have shot elk with the 6.5 Creedmoor and 260. And I'm not advocating long-range shooting, but I know two of them personally have dropped elk 650 yards with one-shot kills. And both of them are world-class shooters. Both of them are world-class hunters. They have more trophies on their wall than I would collect in 2 lifetimes. One of them's 14 years, 15 years old at the time. So the reason they chose those calibers is super tough bullets, the ability for those bullets to stay together, what they consider sectional density, their ability to shoot them well and enjoy practicing and shooting them, and their ability to put the shot where it went. So I personally have a lot of experience with 6.5s. I shot a 260 forever in matches. I've got tens and tens of thousands of rounds downrange with them. But we're going to limit this conversation to hunting scenarios and in a hunting weight rifle. And I'm going to say lighter than normal. So I would consider a lightweight hunting rifle 10 to 12 pounds, right? But we're going to use 10 pounds for a recoil calculator simply because if you are building this for a younger shooter or a female shooter or someone who just doesn't want to lug around a 12 and 14 pound rifle, you're going to build a light rifle. And so I would think 10 pounds is heavy enough that it's going to be controllable for recoil, all of that stuff, but it's light enough that you're not going to get a lot of grief after they carry it for 2 or 3 hours on a hunt. So like all of this, we're going to use the 22 Creed as a baseline, but I just want to share with you a couple numbers on the 6.5, and I use the 6.5 Creedmoor just because it's the most commercially acceptable or accepted 6.5 caliber of choice, non-magnum. In the next podcast, we're going to be talking about the 264 Win Mag and 6.5 PRC and sort of where they pick up and add another level to this cake when it comes to shooting 6.5s at big game animals. Now, shooting a 140 grain bullet, the average velocity on Hodgkin's reloading sight with a 24-inch barrel was 27.35, so that's what I used. And we're going to use 143 grain horn of the ELX for our example. So running at that speed, what we're saying is that this rifle at 500 yards still has nearly 1,500 foot-pounds of energy, and drops down to about 1,000 foot-pounds of energy at just past 800 yards. Now, at 300 yards, it has 1,783 foot-pounds of energy. At 200 yards, nearly 2,000 foot-pounds of energy. But the velocity, here's where it gets a little muddy, and someone had emailed us about this. We're going to talk about this in a minute. At 1,500 foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards, your velocity is now down to 2142. Wherein the 22 Creedmoor shooting a 90 grain bullet, your velocity is still at 2375. So it's almost 10, 15% faster, right? Now, those numbers are going to play out here in a minute, and they're going to get better. We were talking about, with rifles, right, the enjoyment level. Enjoyable to shoot 1 to 10 foot-pounds of energy on a shooter. Comfortable to shoot would be 10 to 20. So 10 to 20... it's not going to be fun for everybody, but it's going to be enjoyable for most, and most people will be able to shoot it well. So we're talking 1 to 10 is enjoyable, 10 to 20 is comfortable. With this rifle, in a 10-pound setup with no muzzle brake, we're at 10.4 foot-pounds of energy on the shooter. That's how hard it's hitting the shooter. And if we put a muzzle brake on it with about a 40% effective rate, I use that because the average suppressor is probably 35%. The average muzzle brake's a little more than 40%. It's probably 45. We're going to use 40 to split the difference. But now we're taking the recoil down to 8.19, getting back down to that enjoyable. So you are getting into the comfortable level, which means it's right at the beginning of where most people are going to be comfortable shooting it. Some people might not find it absolutely fun. Like for example, with Walt getting a little bit of bipod hop, even though he was suppressed. Then here's the key though with the 6.5s. It's sort of interesting especially when we're not talking match shooting, where we're going to be shooting an ELD match 140 grain with this awesome BC and we're letting it sail out there forever. That's not our goal in hunting. We're trying to kill stuff. So the things that kill animals is bullet construction and speed. Velocity kills. That cavitation, it happens when it hits the animal. Its ability to blow through bone and shoulder if that's what you hit. But where I think the 6.5 Creedmoor and such calibers shine is when you start talking about, in this case, I used 110 Raptor from Cutting Edge Bullets. 110 grain bullet that's nearly 1.5 inches long. So it's as long as 147 grain. It almost mirrors it as far as the shape. Super long bullet. We can actually shoot that bullet at the speed of the 22 Creedmoor. We can now get that bullet up to 3,150 feet per second average. That's not me saying the fastest thing I can find in the book. That's average across the top load amongst multiple powder uses. So we're at 3,150, way faster. We are at 9.71 for a 10-pound rifle with no muzzle brake and 7.03 with recoil reduction of a brake or suppressor. So we're still in the enjoyable with getting under that 10 foot-pounds of energy on the shooter. We're at 9.71. And if you put a brake or suppressor on it, we're at 7.03. Now, that might not sound like much, but compared to a 143 grain bullet, you're dropping your recoil with unsuppressed, unbraked, about 10%, which is significant. I mean, that's noteworthy, right? But if you suppress it, you're dropping it down to 7 foot-pounds, which is another 10%. So comparing the 10.4 of an unsuppressed 143 grain bullet, foot-pounds of energy on the target, when you change that to 110 grain bullet, and then you put a brake or suppressor on it with a 10-pound rifle, you're at 7. That's like a 30% recoil reduction on the shooter himself. That's 30% less recoil. That's significant. And for a younger shooter, it brings it right back down to enjoyable status for a newer shooter, for a female shooter. And then here's the fun part, right? Yes, our energy bleeds off on these significantly because of the BC. The BC on a 110 grains cutting edge solid bullet is only 0.4, right? It's pretty low in the G1. But it still has 1,500 foot-pounds of energy at 300 yards and still has about 1,000 foot-pounds of energy on the animal at 600 yards. At 500 yards, the velocity, because you're bleeding off speed so fast because of the low BC, between the 143 and the 140, here's where your energy on target gets really multiplied at distance. So at 500 yards, your velocity for the 110 Raptor is 2176, and for the 143 grain ELD X, it's 2142. So at 500 yards, the speed levels out between the two because you're losing speed like crazy with the low BC. And here's where the longer shots, great idea for hunting if you think you're shooting beyond 500 yards for sure, is to pick out the heavy high BC bullets because they're going to carry that energy and speed further downrange and eventually really pass it up big time. And you're going to start bleeding off speed off the lower BC lighter bullet, and you're going to maintain speed and energy with the heavier bullet. But that said, though, at 300 yards, let's just use 300 yards for an example, you're at 2,370 feet per second with the 143 grain bullet out of a 6.5 Creedmoor, and you were at 2,540 with the 110 grain bullet. At 100 to 200 yards, here's where it gets really significant. At 200 yards, with the 110 Raptor, you were at 2734. At 200 yards, the 110 Raptor has the same velocity as the 143 grain EODX at the muzzle. And velocity kills, that cavitation kills. So when you start talking, like we had a customer ask the other day, 300 yard and in, what's a good choice? And these solid bullets are here. 500 yards might be pushing it. It's still about going to mirror the lead-based bullets. Beyond that, you start to just lose too much. But 300 and in is where it just shines, right? You've got that much energy and speed on target. And at 100 yards, you're nearly 3,000 feet per second. You're faster than the 143. So sneak closer. If it's a younger shooter, of course, my guess is they're probably not going to take long-range shots anyway, and consider that. And another option would be the Barnes bullet, which might even be a better choice because they might have even a little bit better and higher BC. Now, I did have a listener email me, and his first email was really getting into the bushes of misinformation of how people use foot-pounds of energy to rate, killing power of rifles, and that's wrong. That was his email to me, if I read it correctly, and that it's about bullet construction and velocity. That's what kills animals. And in a lot of ways, I absolutely agree with him. I mean, that's why I'm a big advocate of the lighter bullets and the solids, like a 110 solid compared to a 140 grain lead-based. That's why I'm a big advocate of the 22 Creed shooting a 70 or 80 grain solid. The speed that you can get these things up to and the construction of the bullet just makes them absolutely insane as far as their killing abilities, right? But the reason we use this 1,000 foot-pounds of energy and 1,500 foot-pounds of energy is because that's what everybody grew up with. Everybody, that at least gives us a baseline to how much energy on target it has. It has nothing to do with the speed, which kills, has nothing to do with the bullet construction, which kills. But the foot-pounds of energy on target at least gives us a baseline to compare how does this cartridge do compared to other cartridges, because that's what's been preached to us for 30 years, 40 years of how many foot-pounds of energy we need on the animal to successfully kill it. And I agree with the listener that emailed me saying that it has to do with bullet construction and it has to do with speed. Those things are more important. And, of course, go one step further, shot placement. So I just want to go back to the 22 Creedmoor just to give you an example of this, is at 250 yards shooting a 90 grain bullet, it's still moving at 27-22, the same velocity as the 6.5 Creedmoor at the muzzle, shooting a 143 grain bullet, or the 200-yard velocity of the 110 grain bullet out of a 6.5. And that's a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's not going any and starting any faster. It's just a higher BC bullet, so it can carry that speed further down range. Now, let's dive into the bushes about the construction of the bullet. Now, this is going to be a totally different podcast, and we're going to really get into detail and probably invite some people on to speak about it. But that said, there's no denying it. You have to be careful that there is a min and max speed in which these bullets will perform. You take a bullet that's not designed to shoot big game animals or that's unpredictable in their characteristics. A common argument across the board is like the 168 grain Sierra boat tail hollow point or Sierra match, 168 grain Sierra match king, right? Some people love it for hunting. Other people have had awful experiences. It's, did it blow up on impact or did it pass through the animal? So you get an unpredictable amount of reliability on when it opens and how it opens, and some of that has to do with what it hits. Does it hit solid on the shoulder blade or on a big meaty portion of the animal, or did it hit in the rib cage, where it can blow a softball-sized hole into the animal? So when you're picking out hunting bullets, what's nice now is bullet construction has really taken a step forward. And then the unsung hero to bullet construction is what's called sectional density. And I know that a lot of people don't talk about this, and we're going to get into it in another series of podcasts. But just for your own reference, if you go back and you look at sectional density, is the ability, or I don't want to say the toughness of the bullet, but think of the narrower we make that lead core and the longer we make it, its ability to put and push through material, its ability to be tough, right? Sectional density. The 6.5 Creedmoor has been king forever with some of the highest sectional density of any swaged bullet. And that's why it's the most popular moose cartridge in Europe with the 6.5 by 55 Swede. The 22 Creed with those really long bullets have a super high sectional density as well, which means rather than a 168 grain Sierra with this really wide lead core inside that jacket. So in other words, think of the face of that core, how wide it is. So when it hits, it's got a big wide surface area to hit and blow up. Where when you have a pencil-like lead core, it's able to keep pushing through. And that's, I guess, a layman's way to describe sectional density. But we're going to dive into that. But if you want some curious reading, start reading about sectional density and how important it is when you start talking about rating a bullet for its ability to be tough. One of the reasons why the 6.5 Creedmoor beats the daylights out of our steel. 350 yards, it literally drilled a hole through one of our AR plates over time with people hitting the center of it over and over again. And that's never happened with any other caliber here at the school outside of intentional damaging bullets designed to damage steel. So next week, we're going to dive into the 6.5 Magnums, and we're going to specifically talk about the 264 Win Mag, only because I've got some great experience with it. It's one of my favorite pre-6.5 PRC cartridges. And then we're going to talk about the 6.5 PRC, which all that kicks us up a big notch and is worthwhile talking about while still keeping us in that enjoyable or comfortable area of recoil, felt recoil on the shooter. So we launched our Wolfpack. You'll see that is up and live and well. And you'll see that we are going to give away a shooting school slot of choice for 2025. We want to say thank you to all those that have signed up for our online long-range shooting school, as well as those signing up for our reloading classes. We'll be posting up a new video for that later today. And it's a one price for all. So if you decide you would like to join us here at Wolf Precision and join our Wolfpack, not only do you get the online long-range shooting school, but all the other content that we post up will be included in that as well. There's no tier systems where you have to pay more or to upgrade to a different level to get access to, for example, our reloading content that we're starting to post up now. But if you just sign up before Thanksgiving, so you have to sign up before November 24th, on Christmas Day of 2024, we are going to give away an all-inclusive spot to our long-range shooting school, one of 5 slots. Then that includes use of the school rifle and ammunition. So it's a $2,000 giveaway, and it's going to be those who are part of our Wolfpack. So if you would like to join our online long-range shooting school, this gets you a chance to throw your hat in the ring, and on Christmas is our way of saying thank you for everybody who supported us, who has attended the school, and who has decided to join our Wolfpack and our community here. We're going to give away a slot to one of the members of the Wolfpack. So you can learn more about that at wolfprecision.net and just click on the Wolfpack page. Another common question we get is rifle maintenance. We're going to be doing an entire series. Adam is actually posting up a video this week on how we clean up marks off the barrels. And we showed a law enforcement team this last week. We had a sniper team here. They took delivery of a couple rifles. And Adam showed them how to take the marks out of their barrels and their equipment when they get it all banged up. And he said they were just totally flabbergasted. And everybody shows it to is sort of stunned how simple and easy it is and how well it works, right? So Adam is posting up a video. It'll be on our Wolfpack page, but we're also going to post it up on YouTube on how to take marks out of Cerakote and stainless steel if you get your barrel all banged up and you would like to at least have it look presentable or look nice again. Adam posted up a nice video. It'll be up later today for you to check out on how to take care of that. And you're going to see lots of those videos coming out. So it won't be specifically part of our rifle and maintenance building series, but it's just our way of giving something back. So you can stop over to our YouTube channel, it's Wolf Precision, or you can stop over to our website and you'll see the video being linked up later today. So we spent a lot of time in research and development. Somebody had asked last week on how old I was and how long I've been doing this, and I'll be 53 this year. I literally have been shooting since I was about 8 or 9 years old with a 22 long rifle that stayed above my bed in one of those Kmart special gun racks that you could buy for $89. So it had my single shot shotgun, it had my single shot 22, it had my grandfather's old Savage, magazine fed. And I used to dry fire all the time. I used to practice all the time, although, hindsight 2020 probably wasn't the healthiest thing for the rifles. But I've been shooting a long time. Professionally, I've been probably doing this for 30 years, working on and growing as a shooter, learning to win, really trying to master the fundamentals, and then trying to share it, And in that path, running almost like a set of railroad tracks, parallel to everything that I've ever done as far as shooting goes, was another portion of me that was just OCD, ADD equipment, right? Having the perfect built rifle, going through and eliminating and finding and fixing as many problems as I can, getting them out of the way of my enjoyment into long-range shooting or being able to hit stuff at distance more often than miss. And that railroad track, if you want to call it, has been the compass of my life. So it's been shooting on one side of the railroad tracks. Think of 2 sets of tracks going down the line. And you've got the other rail on the left side that has been my obsession with making the perfect rifle and the pursuit of making the perfect rifle. In our world, I think it's really difficult to put your finger on what makes a great shooting rifle, especially when it comes to the working public. And in our world, we purchase a lot of all these different peripheral items or all these parts and pieces that we don't make in-house, right? And we bring them all together. But what I'm often amazed at is one of the things that people, I think, take for granted is the very most important part of the rifle, the one that actually holds the cartridge, the piece that joins all other working pieces together. And for the record, the one piece that most manufacturers, especially in the custom world, don't want to make, and that is the chamber. We call it the ACE system, right? So we actually manufacture the chamber on its own 2 feet. It is a working component of the rifle. And I want you to picture that chamber, right? I want you to picture this piece of steel that encompasses the cartridge. That is the only piece that supports that round, right? That is the utmost apex pinnacle part of the rifle, is that perfect chamber. Joined to that chamber is a receiver, which is the loading and firing mechanism of the cartridge, and the barrel, which, a lot of people put all of this weight on the barrel, but the barrel's job isn't an accuracy enhancing thing. The barrel's job is to spin the bullet and to allow that cartridge to build pressure to push it and get velocity. The union of those two around that chamber is the heart of accuracy. That is the most important thing when it comes to a world-class and great shooting rifle. From there, everything else is either what is required to get that round to fire, what is required to get the bullet to spin when it leaves the cartridge, right? And all the other accessories that support the firing mechanism, which we would consider the barreled action, which, you're talking about the stock, you're talking about the bipod, you're talking rear bags, you're talking the optics, you're talking sights. Everybody in this industry makes all of that stuff. But on the grand scheme of things, you think of like your most famous stock makers like MDT. And MDT, just to give them a quick plug here, they're a sponsor of the show. We appreciate their support for the show. They make world-class chassis, but they don't make rifles. They don't chamber. You think about all your other stock makers. Think about your barrel makers. Some of them do offer prefits, but that's not their core. They want to let other people do it. Think about all of your action makers that are out there. There's probably 50 action makers now. How many of them are offering prefits for their own actions? And you need to ask yourself, why are all these big companies not doing it? And that's because A, it's the hardest thing to do, and B, they're on the hook when it doesn't shoot. And they don't know why some things shoot and some things don't. There's a lot of opinions, and there's a quote-unquote a lot of experts out there, but truthfully, there's such gray areas in the magic of getting a rifle to shoot well that most of them will stay in their wheelhouse, and I just want to make a part for the rifle and sell it. I don't want to build a rifle because the gunsmith will always be on the hook for when the rifle doesn't perform, and they don't want to be on the hook, right? So when we talk about the heart of an accurate rifle, and we're saying, what is the starting point for an accurate rifle? It's not, technically speaking, the chamber pushed into a barrel. It is the chamber. And the only way you can make a perfect chamber is to not try to free float form it inside of another imperfect part. A barrel has curvature to the bore. A barrel has different size rifling. A barrel it can have more issues than Ellen DeGeneres in a Chippendales nightclub. And as much as my wife hates when I tell that joke, I think it's hilarious. But that's how many issues can be had in a barrel, from stress to the rifling to the grooves and lands being cut differently, having marks in them. There's just a ton of things. And then you think about, you're forcing a free-floating drill bit into it to form the chamber that your cartridge now is supported in, trying to line that up perfectly with the rifling, which, by the way, isn't straight. And then on the back end of that, you're trying to keep it perfectly straight to lock into a receiver whose bolt is, when it's in the firing position, is held upright, which removes the top lug from contacting. It also makes the bolt face itself not straight, square, and true to the back of the cartridge. It basically tilts it forward a little bit. Then when it fires, it drops down. When your trigger releases the firing pin, your bolt drops down into the rear of the receiver. Your front lug comes back into contact with the receiver. Your bolt face then straightens up. That's after your firing pin slams into the back of your primer, right? Who's straight? Where does straight start? Where is the heart of the rifle? It has always been the chamber. Now, there are lots of gunsmiths out there that traditionally chamber, right? We're talking 30, 40, 50, 60, 125-year-old technology of how this was done in the 1890s and 1910 and 1920. That's over 100 years old, and they're still chambering barrels like they did before we had cars, before most America had electricity, while most people were still in horses and buggies. And that is still accepted as the way to do it because nobody else has figured out a way to make it better. This has been my life's work. So when we talk about the ACE system and we're trying to say that we're not putting a part out there because we think it's, well, we're just reinvent the wheel. Now, the wheel was invented probably about the same time they invented reaming a barrel, being sort of funny here, but we're trying to find the weakest spot of the rifle, and that is the chambering. It always has been. And that is why all these other companies, who are massive companies, way bigger than we are, right? But you won't see them selling barrels. You won't see them selling prefits. You won't see a chassis maker selling prefit barrels for all of these action makers. And that's why. Because nobody knows what makes a great shooting rifle, for sure. Everybody has guesses. And nobody knows what's going wrong when they make a rifle that doesn't shoot. And it's a chamber. It always has been. It always has been. If you talk to 2 or 3 of the leading top bench rest builders in the world, they will tell you having a perfectly straight chamber and a perfectly straight throat is the key to accuracy. And it's almost impossible to do at some level when we start talking about pushing a free-floating reamer several inches into a barrel that has curve to the rifling. The ACE system that we invented has been the best solution for not just repeatably making a perfectly straight chamber, but repeatably being able to put the straightest throat in the barrel and then connect that to the chamber on the front end, and then repeatably have a perfectly straight connection to the receiver and connect it on the other end. But the heart of the rifle is the ACE, and everything else is built around it. So if you want the best technology available in the world, if you want 30-some years of just a passionate pursuit of trying to find a way to make the best shooting rifle that we can offer, and our tagline is, because everybody deserves a great shooting rifle. We're not doing this to come up with something different so we can charge outrageous money for a rifle because we want to get rich off of selling 300 rifles a year. We're trying to bring a better rifle to market than anyone else can produce, and at the same time at a price that people can actually afford to shoot it. Because look, dude, I will tell you I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I will tell you that I have bled off every knuckle on my hand as I grew as a business, and I will tell you there were many days that my feet weren't out of my boots for more than several hours, and that was just to sleep before I went back to work again. I am working class America. I'm a miracle that we made it this long in business, mostly thanks to the customers out there. But when we talk about the ACE, and we don't talk about it enough, that is the rifle. That is the magic. That is where everything happens. Everything else you put around that, good or bad, can have a negative effect, but can't have an enhancing effect. You can't put and make a rifle more accurate than what its potential is. You can only degrade it by adding subpar parts to it at that point, right? So when we start selecting components from there, we select components that don't degrade the accuracy, that allows the bullet to continue out and do what it's supposed to do without negatively affecting it when it goes through the barrel. An action that doesn't negatively affect the alignment of the cartridge when it's slamming into it and the trigger is dropped and the bolt falls down inside the receiver. This is what happens. So we want a receiver that doesn't have a negative impact on the firing of the cartridge, right? That it doesn't hurt the accuracy. But the heart of the accuracy is and always has been the chamber, and we found a way to make it better, and we found a way to make it repeatable, and we found a way to make it at scale. So it's not a custom one-off of someone who just has some magic in them of how they find that perfectly straight throat. Someone like O'Gordy Gritters, who I hold in very high esteem and spent many years with, talking and working with, helped produce some of his gunsmithing videos. And he had it right with the curvature of the bore. He had it right with using spiders, but it wasn't scalable. And that's where the ACE sort of steps in. So when we start talking about coming up with a better way to build a rifle, and we start talking about the ACE, we have not done a good enough job telling people how important this piece of the rifle is and how game-changing it could be in the next 20 to 30 years when it comes to making the perfect rifle. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us on the podcast. Like I said before, we're going to dive into the 6.5 PRC and the 264 Win Mag. For those who might not know about that cartridge, one of my favorite pre-6.5 PRC cartridges for a Magnum 6.5. And we're going to compare them and still stay in that comfort zone and sort of explain what we did to make a really high horsepower 6.5, a good high killing horsepowered 6.5 without killing the shooter, which is sort of always the goal when it comes to enjoying yourself while you're shooting a rifle. So if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a nice comment below. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to share the podcast, we really appreciate that as well. It helps us a lot with our ratings. And from all of us here at Wolf Precision, we want to say thank you for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. My name is Jamie Dotson. I'm your host, and you're listening to Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.